Okay, so not even 2 weeks ago, a guy called Malice, who's one of the only non-Koreans to ever play for a Korean League of Legends team, dropped a litany of allegations against his own org, the BBQ Olivers. Allegations including psychological abuse, threats, and failure to pay players. Now, with the battle lines drawn between Western and Korean League fans, things got pretty heated online pretty fast. But just a few days after all of this happened, Malice apparently apologized, and the whole thing was swept under the rug. So what the hell happened here? All right, so before we get into this series of unfortunate events that unfolded over just a few days, let's figure out who the players in this little game are. Sebastian Edholm, aka Malice, is a Swedish League of Legends player who, until recently, was signed to the BBQ Olivers CK team. You see, Malice is something of a trailblazer. After all, he was the first foreign player to ever play in Challengers Korea. You take a hyped foreign player, a team that was in the LCK but fell from grace,
being relegated, the first team out of LCK obviously is pretty embarrassing.
And you have the recipe for a pretty incredible underdog story. And had things turned out differently, hell, I think we here at theScore Esports probably would have done one of our esports documentaries on that underdog story. But that's just not how things worked out. So on October 9th, Malice drops an esport classic, a twit longer airing a litany of grievances, except this one includes a little more than the usual visa issues or late payments. Among all of these grievances, he alleges that BBQ Olivers failed to pay him for 3 months and have a history of delayed or late payments for the rest of the team, threatened physical violence against players and coaches, said one manager inappropriately touched players in the form of unwanted back rubs, that members of management lost or took items that belonged to Malice, including allegedly his passport, that BBQ Olivers failed to provide proper equipment, where the coach at the time, LS, allegedly had to pay out of his own pocket to give them workable PCs, that at times BBQ Olivers failed to feed them, take out the trash, or do the laundry, that they manipulated players through deceit and lying, and that they apparently ignored pleas for help from the players and coaches. All this contributes to what Malice paints in the twit longer as an environment that's extremely negative and toxic. It got to the point where Malice says that team members had to leave the team house and actually play at PC bongs in order just to get away from the stressful and negative environment that was permeating the team house. He even says once he got kicked out of the team house on short notice in the middle of the night with nowhere to stay. Basically, this whole situation on both sides was just a giant mess, and it couldn't be resolved easily, which I guess led to Malice's twit longer and his public airing of grievances. Now, all of that from Malice's perspective sounds pretty damning, but let's pump the brakes just a little bit for some context here. Now, if you're not up on your Korean League of Legends, you should know that Malice has a history of acting questionably. For example, shortly after he joined the team in 2018, he came under heavy fire for some pretty toxic stuff that he said and did in solo queue, some of which was characterized as racist. Then in January of this year, there was more controversy where Malice apparently acted in a toxic way during a game with LCK caliber top laner Untara. As far as I can tell, this includes, but might not be limited to, excessive pinging in a solo queue game.
미안하다!
BBQ Olivers' coach at the time, LS, kind of beefed with Untara on Twitter. Untara responded on stream and the whole thing got out of hand. But we're not done here. Later in the year, Malice was suspended 3 games by Riot Games and given a sentence of community service, all related to toxic behavior in solo queue. Now, does any of this mean we shouldn't believe what Malice is saying about the situation at BBQ Olivers? No, of course it doesn't. In fact, it would defy all common sense to imagine that this guy just made all of this up. Speaking of which, Malice dropped his original twit longer on October 19th. Now, just a couple days later, BBQ Olivers responded with a ginormous Facebook post and 10 different YouTube videos. They featured the org's CEO and director, Seong Chang Sung, apologies if I'm mispronouncing that, And in those videos and in that Facebook statement, he tries to refute most of what Malice alleges. In fact, according to a translation independently sourced by theScore Esports, this guy paints a pretty different picture than what Malice told us. He says that all throughout 2019, Malice acted disrespectfully to the entire org. He missed practices, disrespected coaches and management, and didn't play the games he was supposed to be playing at the time he was supposed to play them. He would apparently leave the team house and come back and just continue to behave in a way that BBQ Oliver's paint as, well, badly. Apparently, Malice wanted to quit the team in July, and BBQ Oliver's themselves wanted to terminate his contract as well. In August, according to the translation we have of the BBQ Oliver's Facebook post, it was determined by that org that due to Malice's numerous alleged contract violations, that they would cut his pay and sue him.
Judgment, I'll sue.
Now, fast forward to October 18th. According to the same Facebook post, Malice and BBQ Oliver's agreed to the terms of termination of his contract. But when he showed up at the team house, Malice apparently demanded to be paid for the prior 3 months and threatened to expose the org Griffin style if that didn't happen. See our recent Don't At Me on the Griffin scandal for more on that. Now, as for the rest of Malice's specific allegations, well, the CEO does try to refute some of them. For example, he says he never threatened anyone with physical violence and never screamed or raged in front of the players. He says there were certain specific banking errors that led to delays in payments for some players at certain times. In regards to the lack of food and alleged poor team house conditions, he blames it on a move in locations in the team house. But he does say that when that happened, during the affected period, there was a plan put in place to make sure there was adequate food for the players. I hope so.
Please, sir, I want some more.
On the subject of the allegedly unwanted massages and touching from the manager known as Barham, the CEO simply says that that person no longer works with BBQ Oliver's. Honestly, not sure what to make of this one. He doesn't really address the concern here. Now, the CEO refused to address the allegations that LS, the coach, had to provide equipment for the team, or that LS had been threatened with physical violence in the team house in front of the players. Before we move on, one small note here. In interacting with the story, it seems clear to me that part of the context here, especially when it comes to the Western fans being really on Malice's side and the Korean fans being really against him, is a cultural clash of values. I think some of the stuff that Malice does is obviously a bit of a dick move, but a lot of us here in the West kind of feel like, well, you shouldn't have done that, you should chill, bro. But in other cultures, there may be a bigger deal, or there's cultural significance that we don't particularly understand or take for granted. Now, I'm not excusing any behavior on BBQ Oliver's or Malice, but I am saying that when you put a young man who has a history of toxicity into a house with other young men in a completely different culture in a foreign land, some shit's not gonna go well. Now, there is more to this statement, of course, a lot more, including those 10 YouTube videos, and there is a publicly available translation of it on Reddit if you care to sift through it. Malice, for his part, responded to the response, reading that Reddit translation on a stream. At this point, things are getting so heated that you gotta imagine it's all gonna come to a head. But just a day later, BBQ Oliver's dropped this statement on Facebook. Here's what happened. According to a translation of the statement independently sourced by theScore Esports, someone translating for and representing Malice reached out on October 22nd to BBQ Oliver's, apologizing for his actions and asking for leniency or relief from the lawsuit that BBQ had been pursuing. Apparently, Malice came to the team house in person, apologized, the lawsuit was dropped, the contract was terminated, and everybody just washed their hands of the whole thing. Okay, that's a good resolution, I guess, but there are so many loose ends still hanging out there. Like, were all of Malice's more damning accusations actually authentic? What does LS have to say on the subject? What about that guy who tweeted that he had designed the BBQ Oliver's uniforms and never got paid? What about the defamation lawsuit we've heard of against Malice from the guy he accused of inappropriately touching him? There's actually a ton there, and if you guys would like us to look into any of those threads, well, I suggest you drop a comment and we'll see what we can do. All right, so I almost hesitate to say this, and it's good that it's at the end of the video, so a lot of people have already clicked off. But I'm like reading this story, right? And I'm like, okay, Malice is the worst guy in the world according to whomever. Look, I'm sorry, okay? You gotta play one game of CSGO matchmaking. You're gonna hear some shit that's gonna change your fucking life. You're gonna want all the excessive pinging you can fucking handle. No disrespect to my League of Legends players out there. I just thought it was funny. Play some CSGO, you'll appreciate it. You're gonna hear some 12-year-old say some shit that you never want a human being to ever say again.